The streets of Los Angeles, a city built by generations of immigrants, erupted in protest in early June 2025. The immediate cause was a series of aggressive workplace raids conducted by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. These operations targeted predominantly Latino communities, including Paramount, Huntington Park, and Whittier, areas where families have lived and worked for decades. Federal agents descended upon local businesses, arresting over 40 people and sending a shockwave of fear through the city's vast immigrant population. For many Angelenos, these were not just enforcement actions. They were seen as an attack on the very fabric of their communities, targeting neighbors, friends, and family members. The response was swift and passionate. What began as small gatherings on Friday, June 6, quickly grew into a massive movement. Thousands of people from all walks of life poured into the streets, their voices united in opposition to the federal government's policies. They marched with signs demanding an end to the raids and calling for justice for the detained workers. Los Angeles County is home to 3.5 million immigrants who make up a third of the population. The protests reflected the deep anxiety and anger felt by a city that had declared itself a sanctuary for immigrants just months earlier, in November 2024, promising to limit its cooperation with federal immigration authorities. The demonstrations were not confined to a single neighborhood. They spread like wildfire across the civic core of Los Angeles. People gathered outside federal buildings, City Hall, and police headquarters, their numbers swelling with each passing day. The reasons for protesting were deeply personal for many. They spoke of families being torn apart, of the economic devastation caused by losing a breadwinner, and of the constant fear of a knock on the door. The initial peaceful rallies were a powerful display of solidarity, as community organizers, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens stood together to protect their city's most vulnerable residents from what they viewed as a hostile federal overreach. This wave of activism was not limited to Los Angeles. As news of the raids and the subsequent protests spread, solidarity demonstrations sprang up in other major cities across the United States. From San Francisco to New York, and from Atlanta to Dallas, people who were moved by the events in Los Angeles organized their own rallies. These sister protests showed that the concerns were not just local, but national. They highlighted a growing divide in the country over immigration policy and the methods used to enforce it. The events in Los Angeles had become a focal point for a much larger nationwide debate about human rights, federal power, and the identity of the nation itself. As the weekend progressed, the atmosphere in Los Angeles grew increasingly tense. While many continued to protest peacefully, some demonstrations devolved into violent confrontations. On Saturday and Sunday, clashes erupted between protesters and the Los Angeles Police Department, or LAPD. Some individuals in the crowds, described by police as masked agitators, began throwing objects like fireworks, bottles, and even Molotov cocktails at officers. In response, the LAPD, dressed in full riot gear, deployed crowd control measures. They used flashbang grenades, tear gas, and fired over 600 rubber bullets into the crowds over the course of the weekend, turning parts of downtown into a chaotic scene of smoke and sirens. The unrest led to significant property damage and arrests. Several Waymo autonomous taxis were set on fire, becoming a symbol of the escalating chaos. Looting was also reported, with a shoe store on Broadway being broken into, and government buildings were defaced with anti-police graffiti. The LAPD made dozens of arrests, with charges ranging from failure to disperse and vandalism to more serious offenses like assault on a police officer. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell stated that the situation had gotten out of control and made a clear distinction between the thousands of peaceful protesters and a smaller group he claimed were exploiting the situation to cause mayhem and destruction. Amidst the turmoil, a significant arrest galvanized the protest movement. David Huerta, the respected president of the Service Employees International Union of California, was taken into custody by federal agents. Huerta had been present at a demonstration acting as a community observer, trying to de-escalate tensions and ensure the rights of protesters were respected. His arrest on a charge of conspiracy to impede an officer was seen by many as a direct attack on organized labor and the right to peaceful assembly. News of his detention spread rapidly, sparking outrage and leading to dedicated rallies demanding his immediate release from federal custody. The focus of the protests then shifted. On Monday, June 9th, thousands gathered for a peaceful rally at City Hall, but hundreds more converged on the federal detention center where 𝐷𝐉𝐻𝐻 was being held. The crowd chanted for his freedom, their demonstration a powerful testament to his influence and the community's resolve. The tense standoff lasted for hours until news broke that 𝐷𝐻𝐻 had been released on a $50,000 bond. His release was a significant victory for the protesters, a moment of relief and celebration in an otherwise fraught and difficult period for the city, reinforcing their determination to continue their fight for justice. The situation in Los Angeles took an unprecedented turn when President Donald Trump ordered the deployment of the National Guard. Citing the need to restore order, the president initially sent 2,000 troops, but as the protests continued, he doubled that number to 4,000. Then, in a further escalation on Tuesday, June 10th, the administration activated and dispatched approximately 700 U.S. Marines to the city. Their stated mission was to protect federal personnel and property, such as courthouses and detention centers. This marked the first time the National Guard had been federalized and sent to Los Angeles without a governor's request since the 1965 Watts riots, a move that bypassed state authority. This federal intervention was met with immediate and fierce opposition from California's state and local leadership. Governor Gavin Newsom condemned the deployment as a reckless and dangerous political stunt. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass was equally critical, stating she believed the Trump administration was deliberately trying to create disorder and chaos in our city. She argued that Los Angeles was being used as a test case for an expansion of federal power over local affairs. Both leaders insisted that local and state law enforcement were capable of managing the situation and that the presence of federal troops would only inflame tensions further. The conflict between the state and federal governments quickly moved from public statements to the courtroom. On Monday, June 9th, California Attorney General Rob Bonta filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. The suit sought to declare the deployment unconstitutional, arguing that the president had overstepped his authority. Bonta asserted that there was no rebellion against the United States, the legal justification President Trump had invoked, and that the federal government had trampled on California's sovereignty. The lawsuit also accused ICE of escalating the crisis with its uncoordinated and provocative raids, which had set the entire chain of events in motion. The arrival of the military presence created a surreal and intimidating atmosphere in the city's civic center. National Guard troops in combat attire became a common sight, forming cordons around federal buildings. While the Marines were not immediately visible on the streets, their impending arrival added to the city's anxiety. Troops were seen charging crowds to clear paths for federal vehicles, and confrontations between soldiers and citizens became another volatile element in an already explosive situation. The military deployment had transformed a local protest into a national constitutional crisis, pitting a state against the full power of the federal government. The clashes between protesters, law enforcement, and now military personnel left an indelible mark on Los Angeles. The physical scars were visible in the shattered windows, graffitied walls, and burned-out vehicles. But the deeper wounds were to the city's sense of security and trust. The deployment of tear gas, rubber bullets, and military force in American streets created lasting trauma and fear. Journalists covering the events were also caught in the crossfire. An Australian reporter was injured by a rubber bullet, and a CNN crew was detained, highlighting the dangers of reporting from the front lines of the unrest and drawing international attention to the heavy-handed tactics being used. The legal and political fallout from the protests is only just beginning. The U.S. Attorney General announced that the Department of Justice had opened multiple federal cases related to the events in Los Angeles, signaling that the federal government intended to prosecute protesters to the fullest extent of the law. This, combined with the ongoing lawsuit filed by California against the Trump administration, ensures that the battle over jurisdiction and authority will continue in the courts for months, if not years. The events have raised fundamental questions about the limits of presidential power, the rights of states, and the appropriate use of military force against citizens. For the people of Los Angeles, the protests were a profound and painful reminder of the city's ongoing struggles with immigration, policing, and social justice. The initial ICE raids brought to the surface the daily reality of fear and uncertainty that undocumented residents and their families live with. The subsequent protests demonstrated the powerful resilience and solidarity of a community determined to stand up for its values. The events forced a difficult conversation about what it means to be a sanctuary city in the face of aggressive federal enforcement and what residents are willing to do to protect their neighbors from deportation and separation. Moving forward, the city faces a long road to healing and reconciliation. The deep divisions exposed by the protests between protesters and police, between local leaders and the federal government, will not be easily mended. Community leaders, activists and officials are now tasked with navigating this complex landscape, seeking pathways for dialogue and reform. The events of June 2025 will be remembered as a critical chapter in Los Angeles' history, a moment when the city was forced to confront its identity and fight for its vision of a diverse, inclusive, and just society for all who call it home.
I hope you found this video useful. Follow me right here on YouTube for more great content daily. Download my international best-selling book, Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone, for absolutely free at growfast.club. I say again, download my book at growfast.club for all of my 7-figure growth hacks. Get your copy now while it's still free.
There it is. Magnum. Holy moly.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for!
Dear God. It's beautiful.